Throughout human history, there have been many inventions and discoveries integral to our development. Mastering fire, building agricultural systems, methods of written communication, political establishments, motor cars and planes, the computer. Though the people responsible for these breakthroughs likely didn't know it at the time, all of this has been for one purpose: to produce a fertile ground on which to build one final invention that would bring enlightenment to the masses and peace to the world. That is to say, all of human history has led, finally, to the production of the video game train level. A staple of the art form across practically every genre, they are always a highlight of their respective game, with the layout of a locomotive being perfectly suited to fulfill the basic requirements of any and all level design archetypes. Trains provide simple, logical reasoning for why challenges vary from level segment to level segment due to their carriages. Their linearity makes it incredibly easy to direct the player onwards, and the fact that they must inevitably begin their journey in one fixed location and end it at another not only gives an easy explanation on how they narratively fit between the levels that bookmark them, but also allows for the developer to add some sort of time limit if the level calls for it. I truly do believe that if the world's populace came together and all played a truly fantastic train level, and they'd have so many to choose from, we'd all recognize how conflict and war threatens the development of these man-made wonders, and a new golden age of global collaboration would commence as we strive to ensure future generations enjoyed the safe conditions needed to continue developing them forevermore. In case that introduction didn't make it very clear, I quite enjoy playing video games where I get to ride a train. I mean, it makes sense. I love trains, and I love video games. The fact that the combination of the two so regularly produces knockout levels is no coincidence. The consistency at which it occurs proves that the two are made for each other. SRB2 sadly does not really have a train level across the vanilla campaign. Act 3 of Techno Hill and Arid Canyon may technically take place on trains, but come on. One carriage being used as an arena does not a train level make. To get my fix, I've had to turn to the SRB2 message boards, where I did eventually find a map that matched my description. Logarithmic Train. Sonic and company find themselves on a train fleeing from a blazing inferno, forced to make their way from the back of the train right up to the engine despite the challenges each new carriage presents. Sounds exactly like what I wanted. But alas, the stage turned out to be that most rare of all things. A train level that isn't the best in their given game. It's not bad, because bad train levels simply don't exist. But as a self-professed connoisseur of the train level, allow me to list what Qlonever has done well here, as well as where the map comes off the rails. From an aesthetic standpoint, Logarithmic Train honestly does pretty well with not all that much. Considering that a majority, if not all of the textures seem to be ripped from the vanilla campaign, the level still feels completely unique in terms of setting and environment. There's a real sense of speed here, partially due to various gameplay mechanics and partially due to the scrolling textures and sprites employed to make up the break in the forest that the train is travelling through. Of course, that very same sense of speed also makes sure that the forest fire that's raging behind you feels very dangerous, because even if it can't actually catch up to the train, the fact that it can still cast its orange light across the entirety of the train's length makes it an ever-present perceived threat. That's not to say that the level fails to make the more tangible dangers feel, well, dangerous though. I'd say there are two big set pieces here. and they feel exciting and dynamic in a game that so rarely has this sort of thing happen. Set pieces simply don't occur in SRB2's vanilla campaign, and they're rare in the modded world as well. So even when they're pretty simple, they're exciting to see. No new ground has been trod here, but I don't think that was necessary. As long as Qlonever managed to make a convincing train, then managed to convincingly make it look like it was very quick, then they would have done a good job. Luckily, they succeeded on both counts. There are two slight problems I do need to bring up relating to Logarithmic Train's aesthetics though. The first is more of a confirmation of a disclaimer given on the mod's download page. No matter which one you usually stick to, do not play Logarithmic Train using the software renderer. After I made such a thing of it in the last video, I've ended up using the software renderer quite a bit to more consistently hit 60 FPS than I could use in OpenGL. I've come to appreciate the increased saturation in the well-lit areas, even if I abide by the fact that it really doesn't look good whenever there isn't a powerful light source nearby. I had to switch back on this stage though, because for whatever reason, the software renderer causes a whole load of graphical issues. Moments of slowdown across the stage were a lot more noticeable when using it. The combination of the renderer's issues in dark places with the wildfire's orange glow makes the entire stage look like you're playing in some sort of high-performance uber-compressed graphics mode, without the benefits of those modes, and it strangely causes the train tracks to partially disappear, which unsurprisingly looks pretty bad. Just make sure OpenGL is active while on this level, and then you can go back to your preferred graphics mode afterwards. The other problem, although it's more something that would be a nice addition, is that there could be a little more indication of the high winds on the top of the train. Of course, you'll understand how strong the wind is up there as soon as you jump for the first time and get all your progress reset, but I can't help but think it would look so much better if there was a graphical representation of how strong the gusts are to justify how much it affects you the second your feet stop touching the carriage roof. The music continues the make use of what you have philosophy. Qlonever doesn't credit anyone else on the mod download page, so I don't think it's unfair to assume that they're the sole developer of this level. Therefore, I can't blame them for forgoing the very difficult process of making your own music in favour of using a pre-existing track. In this case, that's The Chase, the remix of Radical Train's theme that plays during its Mach Speed section. It's a good choice. Of course, the theming is appropriate, but it fits well with Logarithmic Train beyond just that. It's the right level of energetic for the moment, whereas the basic Radical Train theme would be a little too relaxed. I mean, you're on a speeding train that even the fastest thing alive needs a little help to keep up with, just barely ahead of a blazing forest fire. You need something quick to match that. The only real problem is one that Qlonever just wouldn't be able to get around, at least to my knowledge, and that's the fact that in the sections where this music would best fit, which is when you're running alongside the train, you unfortunately get it interrupted by the Speed Sneakers theme. I don't think there's anything that could be done about that though. While I'm sure you can stop the theme from playing by editing the Speed Sneakers' code, I also assume that would affect all Speed Sneakers in the game with no way to limit it to just the two needed for this stage. That's a bit of a shame, but I understand why they didn't do that. It's not like the music is inappropriate for where it does play. But anyway, seeing as I've now mentioned most of the level segments in some capacity, I should probably talk about Logarithmic Train's level design. Unfortunately, compared to the strong visuals and good choice of background music, this falls a bit flat. As I mentioned earlier, the strength of a train level is how it can use a train's characters to create loads of different unique bite-sized challenges. I recently finished A Hat in Time, and one of the most memorable levels for me was Train Rush, where you need to make your way through a train as it collapses around you. Each carriage presents a new platforming challenge, whether that be saw blades tearing one apart, cannons and pits of lava in the engine car, or even a few being completely wrecked and forcing you to use objects in the sky to reach the next carriage. It's the fastest and most exhilarating level in the game, and part of that is because it uses the nature of a train to constantly throw new challenges at you before any single one can get repetitive. I think Logarithmic Train broadly succeeds at doing this. There are 4 parts to the level, and each use the space of a few carriages to have a few variations on the basic concept they centre around. It's exactly what I would want and expect from a train level, and the map does it well. The problems only begin once you start dissecting those individual parts. The first and fourth are easily the strongest. In both, you're given a pair of speed sneakers, then need to run alongside the train to reach another flatbed carriage before the speed sneakers effect runs out, and the train begins pulling ahead again. They're easily the sections that make the best use of how fast the train is supposedly moving, even down to how failing to reach safety doesn't mean instant death, but rather falling back to the start point of the section to pick up another set of sneakers and try again. Both are thrilling, challenging, and pretty fair. The logs dropped by the timber car in this 4th segment can spawn practically right in front of some faster characters, even not quite enough time to reasonably react, but I didn't have too much trouble with that. Certainly not enough to ruin the moment. The timing of both sections has clearly been carefully thought out, leaving you practically no wiggle room to reach the next checkpoint before the speed sneakers run out. That might sound like a problem, but it's well to the level's advantage. That feeling of sweeping wide to avoid the obstacles only to jump onto the flatbed at the exact moment your speed boost runs out. Oof. Oh, it's fantastic. Unfortunately though, it's the segments in between these highlights where Logarithmic Train really loses steam. The second part of the level is a series of enemy encounters where you need to take out all of the bandits that have been smuggled onto the train. They're not insultingly bad, but they're also definitely not that interesting. The first carriage contains a set of buzz, the second 2 crustaceans, the third 3 yellow spring cells, and the fourth and final one contains a couple of hive elementals. Nothing is done with the first 2 encounters to make them anything more than what they sound like, an encounter against some badniks. The latter 2 are a little more cerebral. Yellow spring cells drop springs that will launch you into spikes, so you need to destroy them using a spin dash aimed away from them, while the hive elementals are a little bit hidden, but they're also much slower. Obviously, SRB2 does not have an in-depth combat system, and most levels, custom or not, struggle when they add combat sections to make them anything more than temporary annoyances, but these 4 are especially dull. And I think it's for 2 reasons. Firstly, no thought is given to the arena design in most of these. All of the bandits seem to have come out of the boxes found in their carriages, and you could easily use those to add some variety in terms of elevation and the like. But yet, the only carriage that really attempts that is the Hive Elemental one, where the boxes are used to hide the elementals when you first enter the carriage. And all the others, you don't need to even think about the boxes, and all the encounters are therefore quite boring. You could still get away with a set of poor arenas if the encounter design took into account how the enemies you face could complement each other though. But therein lies the second problem. All of these fights are against a single type of bandit. As such, all you need to do to win each one is repeat a very simple set of actions. Against the buzz, jump until they're all defeated. Against the crustaceans, dodge their claws and then jump into them. Against the spring cells, as soon as you enter the arena, face the wall they're not approaching from, and rev a spin dash until they've all rolled into you. If additional enemy types were added to these encounters, you would have to have a little more consideration about how you approach each of these. Maybe that would come in having to prioritize attacking certain enemies, or considering how you could use enemies against each other. Whatever form it took, it would at least be something that required an active thought process to come out unscathed from. Again, these arenas are not the worst part of Logarithmic Train though. That honour goes to the third segment, where you're forced onto the roof of the train and need to avoid Rosa's spikes as you battle the strong winds. Where do I even begin with this? Do I start with a ridiculous jump in difficulty? Do I start with how unfair and inconsistent this can often feel? Or do I start with how I'm not entirely convinced it's possible to beat this section as Amy or Fang? You know what? That sounds like a good place to begin. This segment of the level takes place over 4 carriages, with there being a gap between each one. The gimmick of this section is that you cannot jump. Between how fast the train is moving and the strong winds above it, probably caused by the forest fire, jumping with any more force than the absolute lightest tap of the jump button will cause you to be yanked backwards so powerfully that you'll more often than not need to restart the entire segment again. So how do you make it over these gaps? Well, if you build up enough speed, you can walk over before you lose the height you need. If the character has one, a spin dash is the best and most reliable option to do this. If your character doesn't have a spin dash, then the first 2 carriages leave enough space after the spikes for you to build up the speed naturally. But this is not the case for the final gap. Even with plenty of trial and error, I haven't found a way to get around this as Amy or Fang. And between that and the fact that you need to damage boost through the third carriage to get to that point, I'm not entirely convinced whether this stage can actually be beaten as either character. Even as a character who can beat it though, this just is not a fun part of the level. It's slow, it's tedious, it's confusing the first time around, and as I just mentioned, the winds are so strong that you cannot afford to make a mistake. The second and third carriages require you to make jumps to get around the spikes, but I'm terrified to do that every time. Tapping the jump button very lightly is generally enough to stop the wind from affecting you, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that's consistent. Maybe it works around 80% of the time, but the fact that the remaining 20% of the time is basically a guarantee that I'm restarting this section unless I'm lucky enough to hit some spikes to block me, means that isn't a comfortingly high success rate. With that said though, I think there are the foundations of an interesting section here. A lot of games use your time on the top of the train as an excuse to up the pace, as you break free from the confines of the carriage interiors and finally have some long, flat space to move around on. But between the speed that this train is moving at, and the fact that you already get those moments before and after this, I think imitating that here would be redundant. If I was to redo this section of Logarithmic Train, I would actually keep the slower pace of this section intact, and keep the headwind much as it is now. What I would do is change the platforming around it. Instead of weaving around spikes, I would instead have the player slowly inch forwards as signs and other similar obstacles impede their progress. You've all seen scenes of characters fighting atop trains and other large vehicles, just for the fight to finish when one of them gets splattered by a sign or a bridge due to the speed they're moving at. I'd try and adapt that. Rather than need to hope and pray your jumps to the right strength, you need to instead sidestep and duck under these obstacles as they come towards you, until you eventually drop down onto the final flatbed for the final speed sneaker section, with no jumping required. I think that more logically fit the train theming than these carriages randomly having rows of spikes on them. I think it'd still be a challenge without feeling overly punishing. It'd be a lot easier for characters like Amy and Fang to get past it. It'd generally just be better than it is now. Instead, we have a section that kills the pace of the level, that is incredibly confusing on your first run, feels pretty unfair, and is seemingly not able to be beaten as a third of the vanilla roster. It's not good, and it really drags the level down around it. Overall, Logarithmic Train gets so close to its target. I don't think Qlonever intended it to be some sort of landmark level in the vein of Solstice Dancer or Mindscape, but with the simple and effective aesthetical choices and strong level segments, it was well on the way of being a pretty good unique one. but a boring series of combat encounters followed by a segment that I'm not entirely convinced was fully tested prior to release really knocks the steam out of it. It's a shame that Qlonever doesn't seem to have come back to it since release. It feels like a good first draft of a map, and some changes here and there could really let it live up to what it could be, a damn good train level. That being said, there is one thing you can do here that you can't do anywhere else. Boot up the level with whichever character you want, and see whether they can outrun the train without needing to platform across it. At the time of recording, I managed to reach the engine as X Sonic in 17 seconds, and about 35 seconds as Junior Sonic. It's bottom of the barrel stuff, but there is a level of fun in seeing how well different characters can handle the task. For now, I wait restlessly for more creators to fulfill my appetite for train levels, but I hope you enjoy the video, and ciao.